What is hazardous waste? Some people see it as spent chemicals. Others think of it as an industrial byproduct. But most of us do recognize that it is something that can cause us harm. To truly understand what hazardous means, we need to look at regulations that have been set up by several different government agencies. In the Hazard Communication Standard, OSHA defines a hazardous chemical as any chemical which is either a physical hazard or a health hazard. According to OSHA, physical hazards include combustible liquids, compressed gases, flammables, explosives, oxidizers, organic peroxides, and reactive chemicals. Health hazards include sensitizers, irritants, corrosives, toxic agents, and carcinogens. The U.S. Department of Transportation defines a hazardous material as a substance which can pose an unreasonable risk to health, safety, or property when transported. This includes any material listed in the appendix to the DOT Hazardous Materials Table. The EPA defines hazardous waste as any discarded material which is regulated because it exhibits the characteristic of ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, or toxicity. As you can see, these definitions vary. When we look at all of them together, however, a common picture emerges. The U.S. Department of Transportation, the EPA, and OSHA agree that hazardous waste can injure, sicken, or kill, and has the potential to do this to many people at the same time. Now that we know what hazardous waste is, we must ask ourselves, how will we know it when we see it? The most obvious answer is to look for container labels, warning stickers, and hazard placards. More detailed hazard information can be found on safety data sheets, shipping papers, and other official documentation. In some cases, however, hazardous waste can only be identified through air monitoring or laboratory analysis of the substance itself. Finally, how do we protect ourselves from hazardous waste? That's where Hazwoper comes in, OSHA's Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response Standard. To get a good understanding of Hazwoper, let's start at the beginning. OSHA created Hazwoper, the Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response Regulation, which took effect in 1990. Hazwoper covers workers at hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, and hazardous waste cleanup sites, as well as those who are involved in emergency response operations involving hazardous substances. As a worker covered by Hazwoper, you receive various types of training and information based on the job you do and the environment you work in. You'll also undergo refresher training at least once a year. That's the purpose of this program. Let's start by taking a closer look at how Hazwoper affects the work you do. Hazwoper requires your operation to establish and maintain several written plans. The first is the Site Safety and Health Plan, which is designed to help identify, evaluate, and control workplace hazards. This plan contains a description of your group's organizational structure, a comprehensive work plan for your operation, including standard operating procedures, a site-specific safety and health training program, and guidelines for the medical surveillance of workers who may be exposed to hazardous waste. Your operation also has a written emergency response plan, which provides instructions on how to report and handle emergencies. This includes information on the roles of various personnel, lines of authority, methods of communication, and training for emergency response. The Emergency Response Plan also addresses recognizing and preventing emergencies, site security, evacuation procedures, and how to react to hazardous spills, as well as first aid, emergency medical treatment, and decontamination procedures. The Emergency Response Plan and the Safety and Health Plan both need to address the specific hazards present in your workplace. To do this, the site must first be accurately described. This process, called site characterization, identifies the specific hazards that are present and helps determine the equipment, procedures, and other controls necessary to protect workers at the site. Site characterization starts with a preliminary evaluation to determine what precautions need to be taken in order to do a thorough analysis of the site. This initial investigation focuses on conditions which are immediately dangerous to life and health. These IDLH conditions include confined spaces, potentially flammable or explosive atmospheres, visible vapor clouds, and other immediate dangers. When these hazards have been controlled, a more detailed hazard evaluation can be performed. Once the area has been thoroughly characterized, a site control program must be established. This is part of your group's safety and health plan and outlines the system of controls used to minimize hazards at the site. This includes engineering controls, work practices, and the use of personal protective equipment. Engineering controls are equipment designed to prevent or reduce your exposure to hazards. Around hazardous waste, this can include ventilation systems, which remove contaminated air from your work area, and pressurized cabs, which protect operators of material handling equipment from contaminated air. Work practices are policies, procedures, or activities which can reduce or prevent your exposure to hazardous waste. Examples include wetting down dusty operations, staying upwind of possible airborne hazards, and removing non-essential personnel from areas of potential exposure. Whenever engineering controls and work practices alone are not enough to keep you safe, personal protective equipment must also be used. When selecting PPE, remember that it must always match the potential hazards of the work environment. There are 4 basic levels. Level A PPE provides the greatest degree of skin, respiratory, and eye protection. This includes a full facepiece self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, or a supplied air respirator, SAR. Level A environments also require the use of a totally encapsulating chemical protective suit with other appropriate gear and clothing, such as work boots and overalls. Level B PPE provides the same high level of respiratory protection, but less skin protection. Like Level A, this means using an SCBA or SAR, but only hooded chemical-resistant clothing is needed. Level C protection is used when concentrations and types of airborne contaminants are known and are within acceptable limits for using full-face or half-mask air-purifying respirators. Like Level B, though, hooded chemical-resistant clothing is still needed to provide protection against skin contact hazards. Level D PPE provides only basic protection in the form of a standard work uniform or generic work clothing, and no respiratory protection is required. With all levels of PPE, the need for decontamination will depend on your work environment. Check with your supervisor to see what is appropriate for your situation. In addition to using PPE, safe work practices, and engineering controls, it is important to follow your group's standard operating procedures. These are the approved ways of doing specific tasks at your site or in your facility. Since the safe handling of containers is a vital part of minimizing exposure to contaminants, Hazwoper specifies its own standard operating procedures for working with drums and other containers of hazardous waste. Drums and other containers used for storing and transporting hazardous substances must meet the DOT, OSHA, and EPA packaging requirements for the types of materials they contain. They should also be inspected for integrity before, during, and after use. All containers must be labeled. If you discover an unlabeled drum or other container, you must treat it as if it contains hazardous material until the contents have been positively identified and the container is properly labeled. Other precautions must be taken if sealed containers need to be opened. These may include keeping other workers at a safe distance, using non-sparking equipment and explosion-proof barriers, and safely relieving excess pressure within the container before opening it. Hazardous waste containers should be moved as little as possible. However, when it is necessary to handle or transport containers, you should take special precautions for radioactive, flammable, and shock-sensitive materials, such as using handling equipment with protective shielding. Containers which seem to be bulging or swelling from excess pressure should not be moved until the cause of the pressure can be determined and the proper precautions taken. This may include releasing the pressure or reinforcing the container. See your supervisor for the specific procedures to be used at your location. It is important to remember that containers must be identified and classified in a staging area prior to shipping. This way, everyone down the line knows what they are handling. Under Hazwoper, exposure monitoring, decontamination, and medical surveillance also play important roles in the prevention of overexposure to hazardous substances. Exposure monitoring is performed to identify and measure the levels of contaminants in the air. This helps to determine the proper engineering controls, work practices, and personal protective equipment to be used at the location. Monitoring begins during the preliminary evaluation stage of site characterization to determine if there are any conditions which are immediately dangerous to life or health, airborne contaminant levels greater than published exposure limits, radiation levels which exceed a radioactive material's dose limit, or other dangerous conditions such as flammable atmospheres and oxygen-rich or deficient environments. Monitoring can be done continuously or at specified intervals. As long as IDLH conditions or flammable atmospheres can develop, or when exposure levels have the potential to rise above published exposure limits, some form of monitoring is necessary. Air monitoring will also take place anytime work begins at another location in the site, a new type of activity begins, or a new hazardous material is involved. Monitoring is also required whenever workers are handling leaking drums or containers, or work in areas with obvious liquid contamination, such as a spill or contaminated water. Decontamination comes into play when you get ready to leave a contaminated area. While you may think your work is finished, you, your clothing, and your tools still need to be decontaminated. This is not only to protect yourself, but to prevent you from exposing anyone you come into contact with, including your family and friends. Your company provides you with the facilities and supplies needed for decontamination. Personal protective equipment and tools must all be treated, and clothing must be laundered or properly disposed of. If your clothing is not impermeable and hazardous material can pass through it while you work, you must shower to remove any contamination from your body. Showering is also necessary if you become contaminated in the process of removing impermeable protective clothing. Remember, any equipment or solvents used for decontamination also need to be decontaminated or disposed of properly. To monitor workers' health and help protect them from health hazards associated with their jobs, Hazwoper also requires your operation to institute a medical surveillance program. You'll participate in this program if you work in an environment where there is a potential for exposure above published limits for 30 days or more during a 12-month period. Medical surveillance is also required if you wear a respirator for 30 days or more within 12 months. Other situations that require medical surveillance include your developing symptoms which could be caused by exposure to hazardous substances, or being a member of a hazmat emergency response team. Medical surveillance starts with an initial examination before you begin working around hazardous waste. OSHA recommends additional examinations at least once every 12 months, but requires them every 24 months. You will also need an examination if you ever display symptoms of overexposure, are injured on the job, or are accidentally exposed to a hazardous substance at a level higher than its published exposure limits. All medical exams will be conducted by a licensed physician or under their supervision. The doctor may have you take several medical tests in addition to the exams. All exams and tests will be given at no cost to you. They will be at a reasonable time and place, and you won't lose any pay if they take place during working hours. Based on the results of these medical exams and tests, the doctor will provide your employer with a written medical opinion. This will discuss any medical conditions which would put you at increased risk from work involving hazardous waste or from wearing a respirator. It will also contain any recommendations the doctor may have for limiting your work activity. This report will only include medical findings related to your job. Any other information gathered by the doctor is strictly confidential. Your employer will provide you with a copy of the doctor's written opinion for your own records. So far, we have talked primarily about people who work in various types of hazardous waste operations. But Hazwoper also has training requirements for personnel who are involved in emergency response. There are 5 levels of training for emergency response. Each level corresponds with the role a worker is likely to play during a hazardous materials incident. The first responder awareness level is for people who might encounter an accidental release of a hazardous substance, such as a leak or spill. These workers are trained on the reporting procedures that are necessary to initiate an emergency response. The first responder operations level of training is for workers who will initially respond to accidental releases. They are trained to protect nearby people, property, and the environment by containing the release, keeping it from spreading, and preventing exposures, all from a safe distance. The next level of emergency response training is for hazardous materials technicians. These workers are trained to safely approach the point of a release, to plug, patch, or otherwise seal it. A hazardous materials specialist gets the same level of training as a hazmat technician, but also receives more detailed information about the specific substances that may be encountered at a site. Hazmat specialists may be called upon to act as site liaisons with federal, state, local, or other government authorities. The individual with the most authority during an emergency response to a hazardous materials release is the incident commander. This individual goes through a great deal of special training to be prepared to take control of the incident scene and coordinate the entire emergency response operation. No matter which role you play during an incident, it's important to be familiar with the emergency response plan for your group or operation, since the plan outlines how hazardous material incidents should be handled. Whether you work at a Superfund cleanup site, in a hazardous waste treatment, storage, or disposal facility, or as a first responder to hazmat emergencies, hazardous waste can present an immediate danger to life and health and has the potential to cause long-term health problems. That's why OSHA created Hazwoper, so you will get the information, training, and equipment you need to stay safe, no matter what you may encounter.